My next guest in the waiting room represents and is the embodiment of perseverance, of strength of character, and despite incredible obstacles in the treatment and ongoing care, she has demonstrated the spirit that is needed in order to move forwards. And it is my great pleasure to welcome the next guest in the waiting room, Rebecca Langley. Hi, Rebecca.
Hello.
How are you?
Yeah, good, thank you.
Thank you so much for having us here today.
Not at all, thank you for coming along.
Not at all. So when I first read your story, when I first got to know you, there were so many times where I thought, okay, this I suppose is your journey, that having cancer was one part of your journey, having the treatment that went with that was one part of your journey, your recovery was one part of your journey, and then as we're going to learn, the mental health side of things was your journey, and I didn't know where to start. So I think you're incredible, and I think it's wonderful that you've had us here, so thank you. With the start of your journey, can you tell us where you grew up and how that was for you?
Yeah, so I was born in Guildford. Wouldn't say there was anything special about my childhood. Lived in Guildford for a couple of years, moved to Salisbury. Father's job dictated that, as so often is the case.
Sure.
And then later moved back to Guildford and went to state school, did GCSEs, did A-levels, went to university. I wouldn't say there was anything unusual as a child or a teenager.
But and there came a moment when you were at school, you sort of described yourself, you weren't particularly sporty as a child, but there was something quite important that happened that is going to be relevant later on in your journey. Yes.
So age 15, school sports day. I had never run the 1500 metres before. The girl that was supposed to be representing our house on the day didn't turn up. And I said, okay, yeah, I'll do it. Might as well fill in a space. So I did it. Was coming round for the last lap and I was in second place to the district champion. I thought, this is crazy, you know, this is insane. I've never done it before. I don't know, not quite what I'm doing, but should I push myself and go past her and lose it all and look like a wally in front of the school, or should I take that risk and see where I end up? And I thought, oh, go on, just go for it. And I did, and I won. And I still can't believe it to this day. And yeah, I suppose it really made me think, because at school you're always tested, or we were always tested, if you like, on the 100 metre sprint. And my teachers said, oh, you know, you're not putting effort in, because it would take me 30, 40 seconds to do the 100 metres. And I was working flat out and always came last by a long way because I'm not a sprinter. And I think there was huge reassurance in just realising that it's not always what others say. Don't be framed by others say. Don't let them tell you that you're right or you're wrong. And yeah, I went out and won, and it was crazy, but it was a really good feeling as well. It was really nice reassurance to know that you don't have to be told what to do by other people, whether you're good at bad or at something.
And as we're going to learn about you, this has started to become a really important part of your life. But was that the beginning for you of knowing that perhaps you're very good at sports and sport was a passion for you?
Yeah, I'd say it was the start. Certainly a big part of it. I'd enjoyed doing sport at that point, but I always thought I was bad at it because that was the message that was given back to me. So it was really a positive reassurance.
You start to become unwell. And can you just tell us about what that was like and how it all started? Yeah,
so in my sixth form years, I started to experience, unbeknown to me at the time, the symptoms of ulcerative colitis. So it's bleeding, diarrhoea, urgency to get to the toilet, which of course most people at the best of time aren't going to talk about, but particularly as a 16, 17, 18-year-old female, you're not going to admit it to your friends. And I just thought, it's a phase, it might be hormones, it would pass. I certainly wasn't going to rush to my doctor and say anything, and I suppose I carried on and just hoped that it would pass, it would disappear, which it didn't. But would I have accepted that differently if I'd got it now? I don't know. You know, it is how it is. And at the time I lived with it and hoped that it would change, it would go, and it didn't.
And how much of that is you as a person of, I'm just going to carry on with this and I'm just going to do my best with this, and as you've so often said, your bloody mindedness of, I'm just going to get on with things, to actually you're 16, 17 and this is not comfortable to tell anyone, let alone your doctor, your parents, the people around you?
I'd say a lot of it was me. And I was like, oh, it's fine, I'll carry on. But I think with symptoms like that, with the symptoms of bowel cancer, that's the whole, dare I say, problem, is that people don't want to admit it. People don't want to go out there, and there's such a stigma about it. And we don't talk about it enough. And it's dangerous. And so I think it was a mixture, definitely a mixture of both.
And around that age group, can you give me an insight on what it was like? Because you would have been preparing to go to university. Again, you're growing up as a young woman, but you've still got these ongoing problems that you're not having any treatment for. You don't even know that you've got a problem, in a sense.
I lived in embarrassment. I lived with anxiety. I lived with fear. Would I get to the toilet? Is there a toilet? Is the toilet clean? Is it functional? There's the mental side. You know, the symptoms are physical. Colitis is just such a horrible, horrible illness. And it is physical, but the mental strain, I mean, I used to call it my toilet radar. And I'd go into town, albeit for half an hour, and I would step out of one shop knowing that there'd been a toilet in that shop or in that arcade or wherever I was. And literally that radar would be thinking, right, where is the next toilet? Where's the nearest one? Am I going to get there? Have I got my radar key, my disabled key with me? And it was just on overdrive, absolutely on overdrive. My anxiety was through the roof. And I remember saying later on when I had the diagnosis, I remember saying, you know, if I could just get rid of that anxiety. And it didn't. It would never leave during that time, because if you can't control your bowels, you're going to be anxious wherever you go. Yeah, so trying to be an active, social 16, 17, 18-year-old, I tried. I don't know how I did it. There were nights I had to dip out of things. There were nights where I would have to leave events and socials early, but it is a hideous, hideous disease, and I would just say, please don't be ashamed of it. Go and see a doctor. What
was the biggest inhibitor to going to the doctor? Because you were clearly getting worse. You weren't getting better. You may have had good days and bad days, but what was the thing that stopped you from seeking help?
Probably partly ignorance. You know, I genuinely thought it would pass. And that sounds ridiculous, but I genuinely thought, oh, you know, it'll be okay. I'll just carry on. And I shouldn't have done, and I know that. And I didn't see it as a problem, which sounds really, really stupid to somebody that isn't in that situation. But I suppose we all hide things away and say, well, actually, I don't want to talk about this. I suppose it just didn't occur to me for a while.
And it's so easy to normalise things.
And not admitting to it myself as well. Yeah. Like I'd say lying to myself, so yeah.
Sure. You had career aspirations growing up. Where were you hoping to be, and what were you hoping to do?
So all I ever wanted to be as a child was to be in the Royal Navy.
Was there anything in particular that was inspiring you about them?
So I joined the Naval Reserve at university, and I served 4.5 years before I failed the medical with them, and it was a dream come true, and I wanted to join full-time after that. Unfortunately, obviously, health didn't allow that. But that was me. That was what I wanted, and I felt at home in that. I felt great pride in that, and I'm glad that I got those 4.5 years that I did.
And you've already alluded to this, that unfortunately things didn't work out because of medical problems.
I was referred to hospital. I had an endoscopy, and they confirmed that I had colitis. I mean, it's delightful, isn't it? They give you pictures of your bowel and say, this is what the inside of your bowel looks like, and this is what's wrong with you. And you're kind of coming around from this haze of sedation, and you haven't got a clue where you are or what's happened after 24 hours of Movicol and various prep for it, which anybody who's had it will be very familiar with. You know, it's not a pleasant experience at all. And you're coming around, and then they say, oh, you've got this diagnosis, and you think, well, what on earth is this? I've never heard of it. And then the surgeon confirmed that for me, and he said, you know, you've got colitis and you'll have it for life. And I was just like, what? Hold on. And of course, the first thing I did was I came home and I went on the Royal Navy Careers website, and I looked at the medical restrictions, and it said, colitis was listed, and I broke down. That was it. That was my future. That was all my dreams. That was my world. Just crumbled in minutes.
What were the next things that you ended up doing after that?
So I did various jobs. I worked in pubs and bars while I could. Just got whatever part-time work I could, but the colitis was just too bad. Even with medicines, it wasn't great. I ended up on steroids, and of course you get all the side effects of steroids, which aren't pleasant. That affected my mood and my anxiety. And I had to take some time out, and I actually had to just stop for a while and take some time off work and just give my body a break. I think you'll have noticed that actually my body, I don't give myself enough time to heal, and I had to take some time off work and just stop mentally and physically, because I burnt myself out. Kept trying to find other jobs, and I'd do them for 6 months or a year or 2 years, and just couldn't deal with the stress and the side effects and the symptoms. Did
you just decide this was how things were going to be, and you needed to just make the best of it? Did you have a particular goal in mind or anything to aim towards?
I wouldn't say a particular goal. My goal was just to get through each day and to keep going. Having been told that there was no cure, I kind of held on to that without wanting to. And yeah, I was living a life that I didn't want to be living. And it was a very negative place to be in, with very little hope of where I could be and where I wanted to be, having been so, positive and active before. I kept up that activity, but everything was, every activity was dampened by the anxiety and the fear. And I had accidents. But I thought I'd rather be out of the house and trying than sitting at home feeling sorry for myself and not doing anything. So yeah, it was a pretty hideous 11 years.
I can imagine. So eventually, these years that you were just trying to just bear with it and go through everything, eventually they took a toll on you and eventually led you to another diagnosis.
Again, various tests were done and more blood was given. And they did the CT scan eventually, and I was told that I would have a phone call in 2 weeks if it was cancer and 6 weeks if it was anything else. And at that point, cancer hadn't even come into my radar. I was way too young. I hadn't thought about that. And I thought, well, that's ridiculous. And I remember saying to the secretary, I said, well, I can't wait around 6 weeks for this. I'm in too much pain. And she said, well, sorry, the doctor will be back in 6 weeks with your results. And so I had the scan and I went home and I thought, right, I've just got a long wait until this result comes back to tell me what it is. 24 hours later, I had a phone call at home from the consultant, and she said that she'd had my CT scan report and, amongst other things, she couldn't rule out cancer. And that conversation was probably 5 or 10 minutes. But all I could remember was, we can't rule out cancer. It was just confusion, fear. Where the hell did this come from? Why me? Why at 30? But at the same time, that element of relief of, thank goodness, I've actually got an answer.
Yeah, absolutely. And at that time, what were you given to understand about what a stoma was, and how was that meant to help you?
So the stoma nurses came to see me. And they were fantastic. They had what looks like a gift bag, and it had stoma bags in, it had leaflets in. I couldn't read any of it. My sisters were fantastic. One of my sisters read them all and took limited bullet points that I could take from that, because I just couldn't process the information. My brain was overwhelmed.
Just tell us, what is a stoma in principle, and what's the point of it, and what is it meant to achieve?
Okay, so with my ileostomy, it's the end of the small bowel. So an incision is made in the abdomen, and then the bowel is brought to the outside of the skin, turned back on itself, and then you would wear a bag over that. So rather than going to the toilet naturally, I empty a bag, so I no longer have any bowel left.
thinking about the treatment you were meant to have, which is having surgery and then having chemotherapy, did you feel that you'd gotten over the worst part of your treatment, in that you'd faced surgery, you're getting better from it, and now chemotherapy, it's still a challenge, but it wasn't going to be as difficult as what you'd been through?
I remember texting my friends and saying, I've had the session, I'm okay, not quite right, but, we'll see what happens. And I went to sleep that night, and obviously my family had picked up that I wasn't right. My sister slept on my floor, and I kept waking. She said I wasn't right, and then in the morning I started fitting. She called an ambulance. The paramedics got here as I was fitting, and they took me into resus. Apparently I was moved to the oncology ward. And then the second day, the Friday, I started fitting again. And a lady on my ward called the staff, because obviously I was in and out of consciousness. And the staff came in, and after that I crashed and had my first cardiac arrest. The crash team were called. I was rushed down to intensive care. My family were phoned. Mum was told, she wasn't told what the problem was, but she was told that I'd deteriorated and that they needed to get there. And Mum ran to hospital, and she doesn't run. And she met me in the corridor, and obviously I don't remember any of this, but I've created this memory of her meeting me in the corridor, being pushed by the crash team. And I was unconscious and intubated. And she said she describes it as a 4-poster bed gliding down the corridor at high speed, which I can't imagine how terrifying that would be from her perspective. I was then taken to intensive care for the morning and had 3 further arrests. When they'd got me to a vaguely stable point, and I say that because I was obviously very unstable for that morning, the professor spoke to my mum and, just said, we're doing the best we can, but we don't know. Yes. And that was it. I was in intensive care for 3 days. I'd lost my sight with one of the seizures. That was a side effect of one of the medications that I took with the chemotherapy. And my family didn't know if I would survive. If I did survive, whether I'd get my sight back. They did various brain scans to see how much damage there'd been from the arrests. And dare I say it, I was blissfully unaware of everything. And for me, that coma was black and peaceful and calm and serene. There was no pain. And for me, it was an escape from the world. And a break that, at the time, I was very grateful for.
What do you remember as the first thing when you recovered from your latest cardiac arrest?
So I don't remember anything until the Sunday evening. Apparently they tried to reduce the sedation on the Saturday night, and they spoke to me, and I have no recollection of that at all. Everything was done for me in those 3 days. I've got all the ICU notes, and the physios moved me. All the feeding was being done. I just slept. But I remember waking up on the Sunday. I was obviously had been very heavily sedated. I wasn't aware of the pain at a conscious level, although I was apparently moaning about rib pain at some stage. I don't remember it as a feature of my existence, if you like. And I say it as that because I didn't feel human. It was I existed, but I can't really explain it. I didn't know where I was. I certainly didn't think that I was in intensive care. I remember my family trying to tell me that I was in hospital, and I said, "You're joking. I've done my time in hospital. I'll cycle home." I had no idea of what had happened. My brain couldn't conceive it, but I think even from what I could see, it didn't. I was in an ICU isolation room. But it's not like that. It's not like that when you're waiting for, or for me, when I was waking from a coma, it was, I don't know what it was. For me, ICU was more about auditory existence, so I could hear the bleeps, I could hear the buzzers, I could hear the voices of my family saying, well, you're in hospital. And I go, no, it's fine, I'll cycle. And my family said, I don't think they'll let you cycle. And I said, fine, I'll get a taxi then. There was no understanding of what had gone on. It wasn't until I moved to HDU and then I got the more visual understanding. But there certainly wasn't an acceptance of, at any level at all, of what had happened. And I was talking rubbish. I was talking utter rubbish. And that's obviously the confusion, that's the medication, that's everything. And I think partly my brain protecting itself, because at some level I knew that I was in that situation and what had happened, but I had no idea at the same time. So, yeah, it's weird. But at that point, ICU itself wasn't that scary. The buzzes and the bleeps and things, that still gets to me. And I can hear it on the news now when COVID's on, and straight back there. Clinell wipes, I'm straight back in hospital. Yes. But no, ICU itself, it wasn't scary, but I think it's because I couldn't take it in. HDU, that was scary. That's when I started to realise what was going on, what had happened. People were trying to say, you've been resuscitated 4 times, and I'm going, yeah, whatever. But at the same time, it did feel like an elephant had kicked me in the ribs. So, yeah, definite confusion, and didn't have a clue.
We've understood what had happened to you and that you're recovering. And I think we've got a good idea of what it meant to leave ICU. And although you've left physically, that doesn't mean that you're fully recovered by any means. And you being you, set yourself some physical things to achieve. Can you start by telling us what physical state you were in first, before we understand what you wanted to try and achieve for yourself?
Yeah, so in the few weeks immediately after intensive care, I was about 43, 44 kilos. I certainly couldn't stand up straight. I was skin and bone, and it was horrible. It hurt to sit down. I was struggling to eat. So obviously the dietitians were brought in because I had to have weight. I had to get weight back on. And they said, if you can't show that you are putting weight on, we'll have to put an NG tube in. And if that's a threat to make you... It worked. But I just didn't want to eat. I just looked at food and felt sick because of what my body had been through the pain I was in, and through the bowel shutting down earlier on in the recovery. So I was on about 6 meals, and I don't mean 6 spaghetti bolognese, I mean 6 kind of scone and cream and jam, because they just said just get high calories into you, and that was just an effort. And then I was on 3 400 calorie drinks as well, and still it took me 6 months to get to 50 kilos. I'd lost my bowel, I felt like I'd lost my mind, and I was 31 and thinking, what the hell now? And I told myself that within a year of the surgery, I wanted to walk and jog 5k. And I said to a couple of my friends who run, I said, right, next April, we're going to go out. And I just kept imagining, I was like, right, I'm going to go out and I'm going to walk and jog. And I don't care if I jog 10 metres, I will cover 5k. And that, for me, when I was in HDU, was my goal. It was crazy, it was insane. But I thought, right, you're giving yourself a year. Let's see if we can do it.
And what did you go on to achieve?
So I walked my first kilometre in the September 2017. I jogged my first kilometre in the November 2017. I was up to 6k by... it's either December or the January of that winter. I jogged 9k by the following January. I thought, this is crazy.
3 days before the anniversary of you having your operation, and as you said, you couldn't hold a bag, you couldn't walk, and your only aim really was to walk, run, crawl, do something to achieve 5 kilometres.
Yeah.
And you surpassed that so much more.
Yeah, so the distance that I did is referred to as a sprint distance. So it's a 400 metre swim. It's about 22k. I think I did 21 or 22k bike, and then a 5k run. And because I was just so buzzing, I just went and made it a 6k run. Yeah, it was weird.
But can you explain to us what is so evident in so many other guests that I've had a chance to speak to about how that journey hasn't ended, and the mental health side of things?
Yeah, I would say those scars stay with me. If I walk into town, if I were to walk out on the street now, nobody would know. Or, you know, a complete stranger wouldn't know. But those scars on the inside, and I'm not talking about the abdominal scars or even the fractures, it's the mental scars. And those run deep. And part of them will always be there. I think they flare up. Certainly COVID and ICU all over the news has aggravated those scars and brought them all up again. I still suffer with insomnia and trying to get to sleep. When I do get to sleep, I'm often woken by nightmares. I'm not ashamed to say that I'm still receiving counselling. It's lovely to be told by other people that I look well, but there are sometimes when they go, "Oh, you look so well," and then that's it. It's like, end of the conversation, move on. And actually, there's a bit inside crying out, going, "Hold on a minute, I'm not at all. I want to be back in work." I don't want to be stuck in a body that can't get up till 10 or 11 in the morning because it's completely exhausted from not sleeping well the night before. I don't want to be stuck in a body that does half a day's shift compared to your average 30 whatever year old and is completely exhausted and has to take a couple of days rest. And I think people look at my running and my swimming and my cycling and they go, "Oh, but you've got it all sorted and it's amazing." And that's 2 hours of my week. That's 4 hours of my week maximum. You know, that's I train twice a week. I won't do more than that because that is sustainable for me. I'm not going to burn myself out. You know, you can, you know, you've run a half marathon. Well, I did it once. I didn't run again for 6 weeks after that. When I say I was exhausted, I mean I ended up in hospital a few months later. Whether that was related, we'll never know. But people always look at the good bits, and I think there's a lot of ICU survivors out there crying out for help and just saying, "Hold on a minute, our scars are beyond what you can see."
You made a decision following everything that happened to you, and I mean specifically about being resuscitated. Can you share that with us?
Yes, so I have signed various paperwork. There's the DNA CPR. I've also done a respect form, and I've done an advance directive. I have made all of my medical teams, so my GP, my consultants that I'm under, the local ambulance service, they're all aware of this. If I go out of the house, I wear a medical alert with... It says do not resuscitate. I know they can't go by that, but I do not want to be resuscitated. I've had a miraculous recovery. I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. People say I look well. I don't. I look at myself in the mirror and I'm surprised at how good I look compared to how I feel. And I mentally and physically could not go through a 5th resuscitation. With the complications of a stage 3 cancer diagnosis and only having 1 chemotherapy, and knowing the statistics, and I know we can't live by that, but knowing the statistics of reoccurrence having completed that chemotherapy, there are so many complications in my treatment that I would rather, and this isn't a negative thing, but I would rather die peacefully at 35 than go on till 70 having had every single medical intervention done. And for me, that isn't a wish to die, that's a wish not to suffer.
Of course.
I really, really strongly believe that the physical and mental trauma of CPR is not discussed. If I tell somebody my story, and I rarely tell people the whole thing because 1, they don't want to know, and 2, it's really overwhelming. But if I do tell them, their first question I can guarantee is, "Are you cancer free?" And for me, the cancer is the least of my concerns, and that's not putting down a cancer diagnosis, but the trauma related to ICU and the resuscitations just can't even be. I can't describe them.
Yes. Are there any particular individuals that have helped, do you think, or that they are just meaningful to you with the journey that you've been on?
Many people who aren't familiar with the NHS, when you ask them who works in the NHS, I suspect 90% of them would say doctors, nurses, some may say healthcare assistants. Personally, I think once you spent 6 weeks in there, you can't think that. Cleaners. I was forever talking to cleaners. Phlebotomists would come in and I'd chat to them for 10 minutes. They'd do routine bloods and I'd catch up with them and they'd just distract me from another 24 hours. Physios, I mean, I think physios are phenomenal. I can't thank my physios enough for what they've done. You can't imagine how many different specialities I've been under and how many different referral letters and bits and bobs I've been. I think I counted 20 different, and possibly more than that, different departments, different teams that I'd been through in my whole recovery. The cleaners, the porters that took me to the endless x-rays and CT scans and MRIs. And it's all these people that don't even get a mention.
Yes.
And yet played such a huge role and distracting me. You know, not only doing their job and taking me to where I need to be or getting me to the next place in recovery, but distracting me and just giving me 5 minutes of their day and having a chat while they emptied my bin and while they took my blood.
Absolutely. And lastly, what would you say about the NHS and how do you feel about the NHS?
I think we don't appreciate it enough. I realised that 3 years ago. I hoped I realised it before. The number of TV programmes where somebody's on holiday here or a foreigner's here and they're saying, oh, well, no, how much do I owe you? How much do I owe you? And they're saying, you don't owe us anything. And that idea that we have got 24-hour care 365 days a year and the things that they can do, I've said in my book, I can't imagine the bill that I would have received in America and I wouldn't have been able to pay that. And I think we don't appreciate it enough for what it is and what it does.
I think you're amazing as a person, and I think the journey that you've been on and all of the things that you've had to face, it's sometimes quite hard to believe, and despite everything you maintain this really great optimism of just trying to persevere.